Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I want to have a conversation about the MMORPG genre. I just want to, point out some MMORPGs I played and point out some of the aspects out of each of these games that I truly loved. To try to, harness what makes a great MMORPG and what doesn't. Um, so we'll wait for the next slide here, and that'll trigger a talking point for me. Okay, Atlantica Online. Interesting game to start off with. Atlantica Online was a Korean-based MMORPG that, well, it did things different than your typical MMORPG, in that it gave you a party-based group and kind of a tactical battle system where you were more than one person. And yes, Final Fantasy also did something like that. But Atlantica Online was the first MMORPG, if you will, to really put that into action. I mean, sure, we up until the point that Atlantica Online released, people had played Final Fantasy in a single-player environment and quite enjoyed Final Fantasy in a single-player environment. But Atlantica Online was really something fresh in the MMORPG, blah blah blah, in the MMORPG genre. It wasn't just the same regurgitated crap coming from people trying to ride the coattails of World of Warcraft and the success that World of Warcraft and the theme park MMOs were having at the time period. Atlantica Online really pushed the envelope in a lot of features that I loved. As I think a great MMORPG has to have systems beyond the normal thought process. So there needs to be more things to do inside of a world that you're going to escape reality other than kill mobs, mine resources, craft object, do quest. Sure, those are the basics maybe for what most people want, but that doesn't make a good MMORPG. It's the other things, the things above and beyond that make the universe more broad. And with Atlantica Online, you had an online arena system and betting system where you bet on these NPC battles with your in-game currency. And it was done so well. There was such a what's the word I'm looking for? Certain characters tended to win more oftenly than not, and other characters were underdogs. They were long shots that would always bite you in the butt when you thought that you're sure fire character was going to win. So there was enough flair to always make it gambling. It was never a surefire betting system, but it was surefire enough that a person could really invest a lot of time into playing these games. And I don't know, it was like a way of going to the racetrack to bet on horses, but in an online environment, utilizing online currency that didn't matter. It gave an online gambler a safe place to gamble. and the gambling was really good in Atlantica Online. That was my single most favorite system that the game had. Um, Another notable system that I really enjoyed about the game was King's Justice, but sadly, like so many great systems, I don't want to use this word, but I'm going to use this word. Care Bears demanded that it be changed. So what King's Justice was the king of a town, a very sizable town. It couldn't just be any town. It had to be a very large town. And in order to be a town of such a large population, you had to put a great deal of effort in. He could pass King's Judgment, I think, like once a week. And what King's Judgment was he could attack a person, a person's group, and then the group versus group warfare would happen. Each side would have 9 different characters, if you will, fighting versus each other. And these 9 different characters all had various pieces of equipment that, made each and every character a little bit better or worse than its counterpart, based off of how much work you put in the game, how much you ground, how much you discovered, how much you worked to increase your gear, and so on and so forth. Well, in King's Justice, one piece of gear from the loser, that could have been the king, mind you, but one piece of gear in that fight was going to transfer off of one of those 9 characters, who are all wearing like 6 or 7 pieces of gear, would transfer to the winner of the fight. Really, in the grand scheme of things, that was not a great loss for a system that was really a great RPG mechanic, because King's Justice was used as a way for powerful guilds or powerful groups that controlled major cities to, well, smite their enemy. The king would go forth, and if another town was challenging their guild for control of the town, you could maybe discourage them by targeting one of their characters as the king and passing King's Judgment on to them. So it really made you think, do you want to take on one of the most powerful guilds in the game, and so on and so forth. And that wasn't the only reason King's Justice was used. King's Justice could have been used for so many other different reasons, but to be honest, King's Justice didn't get used that often because most kings, well, they didn't feel a need to utilize it. Let's face it, you're not going to be put in those positions all the time. And so, yeah, I've rambled a lot about Atlantica Online. I should probably move on to another game. But so these are things about Atlantica Online that I enjoyed. I enjoyed that it was something new in the MMORPG, in the genre that was so filled with clones of World of Warcraft at the time period, that it finally brought something new and different to play when it launched. It was fresh. It was a nice breath of fresh air in a genre that needed a nice brush of fresh air. And it had good systems like its gambling and its King's Judgment. They were just really well done concepts that made Atlantica Online what it was. But of course, every game where there can be PvP will always face the wrath of the Care Bear, which is funny because now I'm kind of a Care Bear. I've transitioned from being the PvP minded person way back in 1997 when the invention of Felucia and Trammel came along, and Ultima Online, my first and favorite and most loved MMORPG of all time, when it created the split of Felucia and Trammel and separated the PvE and the PvP player base for the very first time, thus starting a very nasty trend in the game community. Once they did that, they set a precedent that would be followed over and over and over again by so many different games, not just in the sandbox MMORPG, not just in the sandbox portion of the genre, but in the theme park portion of the genre as well. You couldn't find a game where PvP and PvE were together on the same reality. It just wasn't something you would come across anymore because of that decision that Richard Garriott made back in 1997 when he created the well, it wasn't in 97, it was a little after, maybe 99, I think. But anyway, when Felucia and Trammel came into existence, it was just it was one of the most devastating and mortal blows that could have happened to the entire genre, I believe. I was a huge opponent of it. In fact, back at the time, I went on to the forums of Ultima Online and I called people Care Bears. And I truly believe that was the first time that the term Care Bear was ever used the way it is now used in normal parlance in the gaming community. I laugh to my friends and I basically tell them that my claim to fame is that I was the inventor of the Care Bear term in the gaming community, as I felt that I was the first person to really use that in a derogatory manner on the forums of Origin back in the late 90s to describe what had happened between Felucia and Trammel. But anyway, I digress. Why was that such a devastating chapter of the MMORPG universe? It's because a good MMORPG like Ultima Online was before the creation of Felucia and Trammel. I think that was one of the single biggest changes to happen to the game that really ruined the game. I'm not to say that Ultima Online wasn't a great game after. It was still a far better game than most MMOs that are today after the creation of Felucia and Trammel. But what it did, it set a precedent. So in a time when you had a fledgling community of gamers, now there's millions. There's millions of gamers out there playing online games. But back then, there weren't millions upon millions of us. There were maybe, hundreds of thousands of us in the time of Ultima Online. And so where Ultima Online went would then, and where EverQuest went as well. So, EverQuest was kind of the parent of the theme park, and Ultima Online was the parent of the sandbox. And then there was also Meridian, but Meridian was a little more niche. Didn't quite have the player base of Ultima and EverQuest. And most people that loved EverQuest couldn't stand Ultima Online, and most people that loved Ultima Online could not stand EverQuest. And so there really was a very clear divide between the sandbox MMORPG and the theme park MMORPG from the very beginning of the genre. And while I have to admit that EverQuest did have a larger population and therefore probably If you were to use the time period of Ultima Online and uh, and EverQuest as some sort of statistic or stat or tool to foreshadow uh, what people today would think about the same types of games between Sandbox and Theme Park, one would have to honestly come to the conclusion that theme parks are probably uh, more appealing to a larger audience, but not by as big of a number as some people might think. Not anywhere by the size that justified the 10 plus years of World of Warcraft clones that came along, theme park after 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 theme park, with no new sandboxes being created. So I would honestly say that EverQuest maybe had 60 to 65% of the MMORPG gamers at the time, with Ultima Online having 35 to 40% of the MMORPG gamers of the time. And while 40% is less than 60%, or 35% is less than 65%, a 35 to 40% size of the market is a very significant number. It wasn't so much back then because you were talking about hundreds of thousands of people. But now, in the current market environment where you have millions of people, if any game could get 35% of the market base, you could only imagine how huge of a success that game would be. But yet, we don't get sandboxes. I mean, yeah, we've had a few attempts at a sandbox recently, and it seems like maybe we may finally get a sandbox here in the next couple of years that is quality. And I don't want to put down some of the games I'm about to talk about, but we have, the sandboxes we've had after Star Wars Galaxies and Ultima Online just, well, they're not the same quality or caliber or well funded, with the exception of one, being EVE Online. EVE Online is the sandbox that, well, it filled a niche, and it's a niche of a niche. So EVE Online is space, and space is cool and everything, but space is space. There are some players that prefer low fantasy and high fantasy, and there's some people that prefer space, and there's some people that love both of them equally. But I think EVE Online, while being the torchbearer of the Sandbox MMORPG after the death of Star Wars Galaxies and the I don't want to say death of Ultima Online, because it never really died. It just kind of faded away as it aged. So no matter how good a game is, with age comes player decline. And Ultima Online, really, it has faced the test of time really amazingly. It's a testament to the game that it is. But anyway, I'm doing a lot of rambling about stuff that's not coherent to what I really want to be talking about. So let's find the next slide, and I want to talk about why that particular game was so good to me. And then at the end, we'll put this all together. Okay, RuneScape. So RuneScape uh, is a sandbox. Well, it was RuneScape showed what a sandbox could really be. It in many ways it was as much of a success as Ultima Online. And when you look at RuneScape is not graphically amazing. RuneScape did nothing did nothing really groundbreaking or extraordinary. But what it did was it took simplicity and filled a sandbox full of simple content. I think that's the easiest way to describe RuneScape is it was filled to the brim with simple content. Everywhere you went was content. And so RuneScape really allowed you to enjoy a sandbox the way a sandbox is supposed to be enjoyed. A sandbox game is supposed to be the type of game where you, the player, utilizing your imagination and your own sense of goals and directions, can make an adventure for him every day. Where the theme park is more of a directed experience. It's one where you're fed a quest and then you go do the quest and you go do what the game tells you to do instead of figuring out what you want to do inside of the game. Those are the two biggest differences between a theme park and a sandbox, to make it the most simplified. Theme parks hold your hand and sandbox don't. So for a sandbox to be good, there has to be a lot of things to do for a person to create their own goals on what they're going to do. And RuneScape was really good at having a lot of content to do where a person could make the choice that that's what they wanted to do on that given day. And if they got bored of doing something, they could change it up and do something else because there was so much robust, simple content inside of RuneScape. Alright, so let's move on to the next slide after RuneScape, shall we? Shadowbane. Oh god, I loved Shadowbane. So Shadowbane was really one of the first real PvP focused games. And there were a lot of things I think Shadowbane did really well and very uniquely. The grouping system where you shared XP, people could go AFK while their friends would kill mobs. And because you were sitting near enough to the person killing mobs, and you would collect XP. And that power leveling process, well, it really brought a new dynamic to a game that was focused around PvP. It allowed the group to carry its members and push its members to be as strong as possible, as fast as possible for the good of the group. And then the group would work together to accomplish their PvP objectives. So there were so many things about Shadowbane that were so well done. I think the biggest problem with Shadowbane was its PvP focus, which was also its biggest strength, which is kind of a Pandora's box, or I'm not making a lot of sense, but I'm going to try to explain. So Shadowbane, I joke, is the first MMORPG where I lost the game 3 times. So on the first server, trying to remember the name of it. It was either Dread or Vengeance or one of the first 3 servers was one of those, and I was the very first Templar with wings on the entire server, and maybe in the game because it was one of the first 3 servers, and I don't know if I had gotten wings before a Templar that was on another server, but I did know that I had gotten my wings on the particular server that I was on before any other Templar, which was for me a pretty big deal. But that's neither here nor there. That's just me reliving past glories of Shadowbane. Um, inside of Shadowbane, well, inside of every MMO I've ever been, I've always been more akin to being part of the underdog than the winning side. I'm one of the people that gravitate towards helping the losing side, if you will. And back then, I was a very outgoing personality in the MMORPG community. I was willing to step to the forefront, lead guilds, create towns, and that's exactly what I did in Shadowbane. I was guild leaders of several different guilds and several different servers, um, and oftentimes my guild would end up to be one of the leading guilds of the smaller Zerg. And what I mean by smaller Zerg is that Shadowbane tended to turn into um, guilds that would swear allegiance to larger guilds, and they would become Zergs. They would become blobs of almost like a faction. So it was almost like faction versus faction warfare inside of a game that didn't really have that game mechanic, but it allowed for the players to create that game mechanic because you could swear allegiance to other guilds. And so I always ended up being the leading guild of the smaller Zerg, the group that had a large number of guilds that banded together, but not as many as the bigger Zerg. And it was a position that I enjoyed. I definitely enjoyed being the underdog, and we came up with lots of really amazing tactics in that game. We would create naked stealthed death squads, where basically we would take a bunch of assassins and other character classes like scouts and assassins that could go invisible. And I mean, in Shadowbane, you really went invisible. It was an amazing feature, and you would basically not bring any gear with you. You would just bring a decent dagger, and you'd all these assassins or would pop out on the same character who would have a lot of nice gear, and we'd strike them all in unison and kill that guy, usually on his home turf, possibly inside of his town. And one of us would loot, and we would run, and the concept was to minimize our losses while doing as much economic damage as we could to the opposing team. And we did stuff like that all the time because, you know, it was guerrilla tactics. We were the smaller Zerg, and we had to think outside of the box. And yeah, we just did that. And that was some of the strengths of Shadowbane. Shadowbane was a game that really took PvP to some of the best levels I've ever seen PvP taken to inside of the MMORPG community. But the problem with Shadowbane is it just didn't have the technology to support the ambition of the game. So when you'd have these huge battles with 300 versus 300 people, the game would turn into a slideshow. servers just really weren't able to support it. But regardless of that, everyone was hampered by the same technical issues. And so even though it was a frustrating experience to have some of these large battles, it still was fun and rewarding because everybody was hampered with the same issues. Well, for the most part. I mean, some of us had some better internet back then than others, and that could definitely uh, give us some advantages in certain aspects of the fight. Like as people are dying off, and it's going from being 300 on 300 to more like 70 on 70, and uh, you're still amongst the living as the FPSs are increasing and your internet is better than somebody else's. Um, you could have some advantages. Let's just put it that way, because, well, there aren't the same types of technologies that are in existence in today's MMORPG uh, as what Shadowbane had to work with at the time period. But Shadowbane really was some of the first steps towards the greatest PvP you'd ever see in the MMORPG genre. I look back so fondly on the destructions of some of my towns. Athens. I think I built Athens on two different servers, and on two different servers, Athens was destroyed. But I don't regret it. And that was the other thing about that was the other problem with Shadowbane, is once the big Zerg got so powerful and took over so much land, um, the game kind of ended up being won, and the only thing that they could really do was wipe the server and start anew, which is really a cool concept, to be honest. But I don't think that's what they intended for. They didn't want to keep having to wipe the server. Um, they didn't really want someone to win. They wanted the conflict to be never ending, without having to reset the servers. But sadly, the player uh, didn't follow what the devs had in mind, and of course the players banded together to create Zergs, which eventually would end up with a winner. And if there was any weakness of Shadowbane, that's what it was. That usually the biggest Zerg was the winner, and it was a matter of numbers at the end of the day. But I digress. So let's move on to the next game. What's it going to be? It's going to be Star Wars Galaxies. Oh my god. The greatest crafting game ever. Bar none. Period. No crafting system has ever been as good as Star Wars Galaxies in any game ever since. And for the life of me, I don't understand why it hasn't been copied 100 times over. Star Wars Galaxies had resources that you would collect for a week or 3 days or 5 days or however long the resources lasted on that particular planet. If they were good, you would just hoard them and stock them up and stock them up and collect them and collect them, because you might not ever see a copper that good ever again with that much malleability and that much. So there were so many different statistics for each resource. Like for copper, you could have malleability, you could have heat resistance, you could have the ability to pass electricity, you could have the reverse insulation, how much it didn't pass electricity. And so all these stats would be completely random to whatever the new resource was that would spawn following the resource that left. So the resources were always changing. And since these were ingredients to make things, some things were better made with certain materials, like copper or iron or silver. Typically, copper, if the thing you're making required malleability, typically copper would be the best resource for the job. But you could end up harvesting a lot of very, not very malleable copper for a couple of days where you've been collecting at your different resource sites. And the things that you need to make need malleable copper, and well, your copper just really isn't, it's not doing the job. But yet you collected this silver over there that is really malleable. And normally you wouldn't make that item out of silver because generally the copper would always be more preferable. But for some reason, this silver just, its stats are perfect, and it's better than any copper you've ever come across before for the job of the for the purpose of what you need that thing that you're going to craft to do. And that could what you're crafting could end up to just be an ingredient in a bigger craft. So the better that ingredient is, the better the outcome of the bigger thing that you're crafting will then become. So Star Wars Galaxy's resource system was just phenomenal. I mean, I'm still blown away by how cool it was. Just I was in harvesting heaven because everything changed and you had to constantly be searching for the best resources because it always changed, and that kept me as a crafter so excited. It made my life frustrating at times because I couldn't find the stuff I needed, and at other times it just made me happier than anyone ever could be because I had just harvested some of the greatest stuff ever, and I'm pretty sure I was the only person to find that particular stuff on that planet at that time period, and I just hoarded it up. Well, the other crafters in my profession did not get a hold of it, and it gave me an edge. That was amazing because it rewarded the crafter for doing his job. And part of your job is to find the best material you could find to make what you need to make. The other part of your job was managing when to use said material and when not to. If you find some of the greatest iron you've ever seen in 5 months of play, and that iron is perfect for making the greatest composite helmet that's ever been seen, you don't just use that to make the next composite helmet you're going to make, because you are inevitably somebody is going to want a custom suit from you. Some rich person is going to walk up to you and be like, hey, I know you make good sets of composite armor. I've seen what you can do, but I know you can do better. But your stuff that you sell on your vendors, it's a cut above everybody else. So if your baseline stuff is better than everybody else's, then what is your custom ordered stuff like? and then they say to you, I want the best set of composite armor ever made on this server. And you're like, well, I could do that, but it's going to cost you. And they're going to be like, well, how much? And you're going to be like, well, an arm and a leg and your firstborn child and then some. And they agree. And now that material you've been hoarding, you're going to cash in on it and then some. So you could have used all of this material as you got it and made slightly better stuff than other people. Or you could have recognized the value of some of the materials you got as being like the primo. And if you could get the primo aluminum and the primo copper and the primo insulator and the primo this, all the ingredients needed to make a certain whatever, and you didn't just use up the iron, the primo iron that you found, and you didn't just use up the primo aluminum you found, and you could get everything together because you had the foresight to know that I shouldn't just waste this ingredient now. I should save it and wait to pair it up with other resources of equal value. Then I could make, Excalibur, the greatest sword to ever be wielded. And that's what you could do in Shadowbane. You really could do that because the outcome of your craft depended upon the resource you were using, and the resources you gathered were always changing. And that's what I loved about Star Wars Galaxies, man. Star Wars Galaxies had a crafting system that was just phenomenal. Phenomenal. I miss it so much. The greatest crafting system ever. Anyway, I've talked enough on that. Let's talk about Ultima Online since it was up on the screen, shall we? Ultima Online to me is it's the roadmap on how to do a sandbox MMORPG right. If some developer had the money, if some developer was smart enough and they wanted to capitalize on the vacuum, and there is a vacuum in this market, there is a sandbox MMORPG vacuum that exists. Players like me have been waiting and waiting and waiting for a real sandbox MMORPG that really has cash behind it to really make something amazing. But it never comes. We keep hoping and we keep dreaming, but it never comes. But if there was a group, a Bethesda or a Ubisoft or whoever that had the money and listens to this video or hears about this video, you need to look no further than Ultima Online. Ultima Online did everything right. Except it's got old graphics. Ultima Online was, well, it was the father of the Sandbox MMO. I mean, I don't know anyone that would ever speak bad that loves Sandbox MMOs. Nobody's ever going to speak bad about Ultima Online. It's almost unanimous amongst the Sandbox MMORPG genre, the community that loves that genre. We will all pretty much unanimously say Ultima Online was the greatest MMO RPG that ever existed. So why was it so great? Well, it had such an amazing blend of everything. The crafting crafting was nigh perfect. So no, it wasn't Star Wars Galaxies crafting. I mean, if you could take Star Wars Galaxies crafting and put it in Ultima Online, you would only make the most phenomenal game ever. I mean, that would be such a blend. That would be like putting peanut butter with jelly and just creating the first peanut butter jelly sandwich ever. It would be like, wow! It would blow people's minds, but, developers don't think that way. Or maybe they should. Because Star Wars Galaxies was, for most intents and purposes, a failure. Ultima Online really wasn't a failure, but it was never the landmark success that World of Warcraft was. And so the sandbox genre has always been looked at skeptically as this, well, niche. Is it a niche that we can really get rich on? Is it something we can sell to our investors? Is it something that we can convince our investors is worth the risk? And investors are like, well, 60% or 65% of players prefer a theme park. So if you're going to try to sell investors on the remaining 40%, that's a hard sell right off the bat, because it's the remaining 40%. But the part that I don't know, 40% of a group of people that have nothing to play is a huge group, when 60% of a group that has 25 different MMORPGs to choose from, that's not the market I would attempt to make my MMORPG in. I would go to the 40% group that's starved and looking for entertainment, not the 60% group that has 20 different games to choose from. But I digress. I'm supposed to be talking about Ultima Online right now. I'm sorry. Let's get back to talking about Ultima Online. Ultima Online had fishing like none other. The fishing system allowed you to catch boots, fish, jewelry, swords, treasure maps, treasure nets. These treasure maps were real treasure maps. They had rank 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they were anywhere and everywhere in the world, and you had to figure it out. You really had to figure it out. They were truly an exploration mechanic, and the treasure maps were so amazingly well done. Level 1 treasure map was worth doing because it gave you an adequate reward for your time invested in searching it out and finding it, but it was a level 1, and it was fairly easy to do even for one of the worst adventurers. And a level 5 team map could be really, really, really challenging if you weren't a Grandmaster Mage or a high-level Tamer. If you were just maybe a GM Swordsman who relied on your sword and shield, well, a level 5 could definitely swamp you with monsters that were more than you could handle. And so you had to think about, what were you going to do? Were you going to attempt to try to risk doing the level 5 team map, or would you just sell it to someone who could do the level 5 team map? Or maybe you could team up with a friend, a mage or something that could help you do that. The treasure maps in Ultima Online were so amazing. The fishing was really good. I've often said that you could judge the quality of an MMORPG by the quality of its fishing system. And I really think that is a very adequate statement. In some of the best MMOs I've ever played, have always taken the time to create a good fishing mechanic, because I think the best MMOs know that all of the different life skills need to be great, because a sandbox at its core is what you decide to do that day that you wake up. You might just be hankering to fish, and if your game doesn't have a good fishing system, well, it's missing the boat. You might be hankering to really get into the mines and go mining and find rare ore. If you don't have a game that has an interesting mining system, well, you're missing the boat once again. Ultima Online had different shades of ores. You had your iron, your copper, your gold, your valerite, your barite, your shadow. And while I think that they might have missed the boat in some ways with the system, I always thought that the different shades of ore, which were also had different rarities, well, that the more rare should have more than just a color difference. That they should, inherently give their gear, some better protection or better damage. But they didn't. Ultima Online didn't really see it that way. Your GM Iron Sword was as good as your GM Valerite Sword. They both did the same amount of damage. It's just that the blue one, being the Valerite Sword, was made out of rare material and therefore was cool to look at. It was blue, so it was more of a cosmetic difference. And so you could tend to sell the different colored gear for more. Funny thing is that Shadow, being more scarce than iron and some of these other ores, was far more common than, say, Verite, which was the green ore. Verite was one step down from the blue ore, being Valerite. Shadow was far easier to find than the green ore. But Shadow was really in demand because everybody wanted to wear black armor, and so you could tend to sell Shadow sets much easier and for more money even than the rarer green ore. Nobody wanted to wear green, even if it was more rare. And so I always thought that was some strange ways that things worked out. But it didn't break my immersion. If anything, it enhanced my immersion. But so Ultima Online, so many things were great about it. One thing I loved was that your character was what you made your character to be. If you created a mage and you wanted a good mage, you really had to think about what skills you would pair off with it. So magery was kind of flexible in that you could augment other things with magery. GM magery plus maybe GM meditation, which allowed you to get recover your mana back faster. If you coupled that with maybe a crafter, you would give a crafter tools that he could protect himself with, tools that he could use for transportation. But a real mage would have inscription and would have other mage-related skills that would make him far deadlier on the field as just a mage. You could have poison mages. So there were different ways of shaping your character based off of the skill pool you wanted to go with, and it was a limited skill pool. You had 700 points to divide up between how many ever skills you wanted to go. A lot of people would do 7 skills at 100, or 6 skills with 2 at 50 and 50. Or, you could even go a little bit stranger and do some 80s or 60s, but however you shaped your character was what your character turned into. I liked that. I liked that if you hit a tree, you became better at cutting a tree down. I liked that if you hit a mob with a sword, you became better at using the sword. That is sensible ways of progressing skills in my mind, rather than, oh, you've killed 15 slimes, congratulations, you're level 2, here's 5 skill points, go ahead and invest them into whatever you want. Ah, I see you've invested all of them into diplomacy. Great, you're going to become an excellent diplomat. Now go kill another 15 slimes. Congratulations, you leveled up again. Oh, you've dumped more into diplomacy. Excellent, you are an amazing diplomat. What do you do with that diplomacy? Have you actually utilized the skill to for any purposes? No, but it has some meta inside of the game, so you're dumping your skill points into it. Bad example, I guess, but the point of that example is a character should be what a character is. So if he's never lifted a sword in his life, he shouldn't be a good swordsman just because, he he made a bunch of shirts and got a bunch of XP by crafting a bunch of shirts and dumped all that XP into becoming a great swordsman. It doesn't make sense. But I digress. So Ultima Online truly, it laid the path for what a great sandbox MMORPG should be, because it had so many variable mechanics that you could do on a day-by-day basis. It could be a logger, go logging. It could be a miner, mining. It could be a tamer, go taming. You could be a farmer. Yeah, you could raise sheep, tamed sheep, and shear them. I mean, there are so many different ways that were only limited by creativity of what you put into thinking up. I mean, you had role play groups like orcs. The orcs was one of my favorite guilds that I was ever a part of in Ultima Online. So Ultima Online had several different character slots, right? You could basically live different lives in these different character slots. One of the things I didn't like about the game, but did like about the game, and I'll get into why I don't like having multiple character slots and why I do like having multiple character slots in just a moment. So, as that orc, I had to learn to speak orc. Yeah, you couldn't talk out of character. You had to learn how to actually speak sentences in orc, or there was no communication. You wouldn't understand what people were saying. You'd have no idea what was going on. But you couldn't hurt an NPC orc. NPC orcs were elders. They were to be respected. And while the NPCs didn't know that, the NPCs orcs were constantly trying to kill you, but you couldn't fight them back because that was against the code of the orcs, right? You had to protect the elder orcs. And any humans you saw, unless told otherwise, were enemies, and you needed to attack them on sight. Any human character you saw was KOS, kill on sight. And so you got to remember, this is in a time period when players respected each other online. When the normal reaction for two people coming across each other in the wilderness was, "Hail and well met. How goes it, stranger?" It goes well, and you have a conversation, and you might even give each other gifts instead of attempting to kill each other. Because back then, people translated their, oh, I don't know, sense of respectability, their sense of self, their everyday morals into their online morals and their in-game morals. So you treated people in the game like you would treat them in real life. Novel concept. But somewhere after the creation of Fallujah and Trammel, when PvP started to become the normal, we don't have to be respectful to people in the online universe anymore because we're just going to rip their heads off and defecate down their throats because YOLO. But I digress. Uh, Playing that type of a playstyle was really very unique. The kill on sight playstyle, especially when you were you were not strong enough to face those that you encountered. All orc players, they had to start with a brand new tune, a freshie as they were called, and the freshie who was running from the NPC orcs that were generally strong enough to kill them. So they were constantly running around the orc fort trying to stay alive, avoiding the elder orcs. And whenever they would see a human player who would wander past the orc fort, they would have to go and attack them. Well, in the game, you would never attack anyone stronger than you. However, the rules of the guild said you had to attack all humans you saw, regardless of their strength. So you would be this guy with 50 skills in Axe, and that's it. You have no skills, and you're like, I'm gonna kill you, heal me, and so you start trying to hit this guy with GM sword skill and GM this and GM that, and he's just kind of chuckling at you as you're attempting to kill him, and you end up dying. Um, maybe it's a good day and there's many orcs, right? So that's how the orcs would generally tend to get any kills. Maybe if there's 15 of 20 of you and you manage to take down one person, that one person probably killed about 10 of you in the process, but the remaining people that managed to get the kill would then receive the game mechanic of receiving a kill count and going gray. Next time they are lucky enough to live through that situation, they get another kill count. Now they turn red. They get lucky enough on enough occasions, they become perma-red. You become perma-red with a character that has 70 melee skill, and you end up following your crazy role-playing guild rules that you have to attack the next human you see, and you don't really have any backup on you, and you go running up to this guy who might have a dragon standing next to him, but you have to attack because those are the rules of the role-play guild, and you're gonna die. There's no question the dragon's not going to rip your face off, and you have your face ripped off, and since you're perma red, you now take perma stat loss, and now you went from having what a brand new character could start off at say 50 axe skill if that's what he chose when he created his character. Now he just took stat loss, so he lost 50 points on his 70 axe skill. That's now 30 axe skill, and now he's red. So he's still um, he's still considered a bad guy. And the next time he dies, he'll take stat loss again. Um, but now he has skill lower than a brand new character would have. But he's an orc, and he's part of the roleplay guild, so he has to attack the next guy he sees, the next human he sees on sight. And so that just created such an amazing gameplay experience. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's hard to explain, but I had so much fun just dabbling and role playing in that guild. I would log on to my orc every now and then, just for the laughs that would follow suit of just trying to be this orc. It was just such a comical situation to be in. But that's what a good sandbox does. A good sandbox provides you the tools to be able to create the world you want. But yeah, that was easier back in the time of Ultima Online for other reasons. Gamers back then, well, they were more creative. They were more. They understood how to roleplay. Um, most gamers came from a background of, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop roleplay and using their imaginations. So now, where we don't have to use our imaginations anymore, the games provide these immersive experiences that just kind of challenge our imaginations. They, you know, new games today are just, they're pretty phenomenal. You don't need to use a lot of imagination when you're playing them, because the game immerses you without any need to immerse yourself via your own imagination. So with the MMORPG community collectively as a whole through the last 10 to 15 years, just slowly sliding downhill. Um, we no longer treat each other very respectably in most games. Most there's more douchebags than there ever have been online in games than there ever used to be. You know, in Ultima Online, you might run into a douchebag once a week. Now, you run into a douchebag like once every 10 minutes, and that's if the game has a healthy enough population to allow that to happen. You know, some games don't have the population for you to run into a douchebag once every 10 minutes, but have no fear, the next person you run into is likely a douchebag. Um, take Daisy, for instance. Friendly? Oh, I have a bullet between my eyes. Maybe I shouldn't have asked if he was friendly, and I should have just shot. Use the time to shoot the guy instead of being shot. That's the law of DayZ, right? You don't have time to type friendly, or you don't have time to key the mic to ask if they're friendly, because if you spend that time attempting to figure out if they're friendly, they will have shot you. And that's the microcosm of the MMORPG genre as a whole. But I am faithful. Or not faithful, hopeful. I have hopes in, well, there's one upcoming game that I can't help but think could possibly almost be the salvation of the sandbox MMORPG genre. And I'm not even sure, well, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a sandbox, but it may not be technically a sandbox. Chronicles of Illyria. Everything I've learned about this game challenges the normal way we think about an MMO. And it really seems like they're possibly putting together game systems that will adapt for the fact that most gamers today are douchebags. You didn't have to put in those systems in the time of Ultima Online, because in the time of Ultima Online, before Felucia and Tremel, when everybody was running around together, the PK was actually a rare thing. It wasn't like everybody was red running around to kill everyone. That was not the way Ultima Online was like. The far majority of people, 98 to 99% of people you would come across, would be blue. They would be kind, they would be nice, they would talk to you, they would say sensible and coherent things, and they wouldn't threaten to rip off your face and defecate down your throat. That would never come out of their mouths. It was just a different time period. And like I said, the creation of Felucia and Tremel, where we separated the PvP player base from the PvE player base, was probably the worst moment in gaming history. It set a precedence, as far as I'm concerned, that has derailed the entire MMORPG gaming genre. It has created games that are made specifically for the worst portions of the PvP community, like Rust and Ark and Atlas. You go join Atlas and you play that game and you're like, wow, this could be an amazing sandbox MMORPG. But it has no rules. It has no systems that do anything to keep the douchebags in check. Problem is, Atlas, if it would have been created in the time of Ultima Online, before the creation of Felucia and Tremel, could have been one amazing game. Because people then were pretty cool. People were pretty awesome online back then. I wish I had a time machine to somehow take Atlas back in time and play with people on the internet back in the late 90s in the world of Atlas. I think you would see a completely different result than what the game is now. Just because, to an extent, the community really destroys games like Atlas and Ark and Rust. It's a noble concept to create a sandbox with no rules and to allow the player base to establish the rules, which is ultimately what those games do, but they fail. They fail because the human gamers of today are not trained to be normal inside of the game world. They're trained to be douchebags. And so as long as the appropriate way to react to another player in a PvP game in the online universe is to rip off their head and defecate down their throat, then I don't know as if games like Rust or Atlas or Rust, Atlas, or Arc will ever really be successful. So, with that ramble out of the way, I've probably talked enough about this topic on a whole. So what is the point of this video? The point of this video that I'm trying to get out is the MMORPG genre is dying, but not for the reasons that most people claim. The MMORPG genre is dying because gamers are bad. Weird statement, I know. And I don't think that's the gamer's fault. I don't blame the gamer for doing what the gamer's been trained to do by game developers. If game developers want to have an amazing MMORPG, then they need to put in game systems that will train their combined player base. We need to put the PvE player base and the PvP player base back together. And we need to train these player bases to integrate and behave properly together in the sandbox. And that requires game systems that have law and order, that have punishments for crime. There needs to be more focus on this area of upcoming MMORPG sandboxes, because without it, we're not going to fix the MMORPG community. You need to fix these gamers, and if we could start to reintegrate the PvP and PvE crowd, put them back together, and start to explain the fact that a good game requires good and evil. A good game requires yin and yang. You need a crafter to make something. You need a businessman to sell something. You need a consumer to buy something. So a person who enjoys PvP may have no time to craft and may have no time to sell. He simply wants his great sword and he wants to buy it. Well, he needs to go to a vendor, not an auction house, but a vendor, and buy that sword off of a crafter that he has formed an opinion of. He knows that when he goes to this crafter, his sword that he's looking to buy is always going to be there. He's reliable. And his price is acceptable for him because of his reliability. These are things that vendors allow that auction houses don't. Auction houses are not fun for a crafter. Auction houses are not fun for an online businessman. They're fine for the consumer, for someone who just simply wants to buy something. Yeah, they're wonderful for a consumer, but they're no fun for the crafter and the seller. And you have to understand that the majority of a good economy inside of an MMORPG is made up of small businesses. Yes, seriously, small businesses. We're talking one-man blacksmiths, one-man tailors, a huge percentage of people who enjoy crafting and online business and games prefer a solo playstyle. You want to have a healthy game economy? Well, then make a game where people who play alone can succeed. With vendors, you can allow these people to, well, have a very important role inside of the economy without the small businessman to sell the sword to the adventurer. Things don't go well. And that's the problem with MMORPGs of today, is they focus too heavily on one niche, on one crowd. They try to separate the player bases. They try to gear towards the PvP crowd or the PvE crowd. They try to, I don't know. They don't do enough balancing of everyone in the sandbox. Everyone in the sandbox has different things that they enjoy, different desires that they want to do, and heck, they could even become a PvPer on Monday and want to be a crafter on Friday. In a good game, they can do that. And Ultima Online was a perfect example of a game where you could do that. You could be whatever you wanted to be on whatever day you wanted to be it. A big group could be successful, and a small businessman could be successful. Every play style could be successful inside of Ultima Online. But sadly, while new MMORPGs are flashy and have nice graphics and you know, have voice acting and cool explosions and or whatnot else, neat particle effects, graphically beautiful, they miss the basic fun. They miss the basic elements that draw a group together to work together as a community, because they're always focused on some particular aspect of the recipe. You want to make good bread, you don't just need the best flour. You also need good butter and a great pan and whatever else goes into making bread. Sorry, I don't make bread very often, but you get the point. There's more ingredients to making a good casserole than just cheese. Well, I don't know if anyone's going to watch this video, but these are just my musings on the MMORPG genre, the sandbox genre of the MMORPG industry, and the lack thereof of good sandboxes. I look back at the sandboxes of old, like, well, Worm Online isn't dead, but I really didn't touch on Worm Online. Worm Online, amazing sandbox. It's everything you could ever want a sandbox to be, except no graphics. It's everything you could ever want a sandbox to be, except a grind that would make most Korean players cringe in fear. I mean, wow, Worm Online has serious potential to be everything you would ever want a sandbox to be. Just some major things that make it hard to play. A grind beyond any grind of grindiness is Worm Online. Worm Online is maybe the grindiest game that's ever been produced. It's grind just, yeah. It's, I don't think anything compares to the grind of Worm Online. And the lack of graphics doesn't do it any justice either. But Worm Online, otherwise, if you take away the grind and you take away the poor graphics, it is an amazing example of a sandbox MMORPG. It should be a smash hit. But Rolf, in his infinite wisdom, well, I really like the guy. I love the guy for sticking to his guns because he believes that the players don't know what they want. And I agree with him for the most part. I agree with so many of his concepts. I think he's absolutely right. I don't think most players know what they want. I think most players, when they get on an online forum and they demand that their ships go faster, they want the convenience of their ship to go faster because they want to go from point A to point B faster, but they don't think about what effect that will have on the game community itself. Yeah, you could now go from the bottom of that server to the top of that server and cross into the server line and attack the guy you want to attack in an hour instead of 2 hours. Now let's think about that. If it takes an hour to get to the person you want to attack, where it used to take 2 hours or maybe 3 hours, then you're going to attack that guy way more often, right? Is that a good thing? If every day you wake up and you're being attacked, is that a good thing? No, it's not. So sometimes one of the best ways of bringing balance to a game, so I'm not saying you shouldn't get attacked, but the time to travel to said person is a real serious motivator or demotivator. And when you increase the ability to travel exponentially, then you increase the amount of people are being attacked on a regular basis. And while you might be a PvP oriented player and that's all you want to do is go attack people, not everyone is you. There are other people that are playing in the sandbox for different reasons. George might just want to make really good swords to sell to you so that you can go and attack Sam. Sam, he might just want to, make really good vegetables so he could sell it to John, and John might just want the really good vegetables that he buys from Sam so that he can tame really cool things. Everybody has a different tangled web to weave. And when you change an aspect that makes things more convenient for the player, it has ramifications beyond the player that then affects other player types. And while Sam may want to be able to take his vegetables to John the Tamer faster, maybe he has to deliver the vegetables and that's part of the agreement, and it takes him an hour to sail, he would rather, sail there in 30 minutes instead of an hour. So it seems appealing that it would be much more fun for me to get my vegetables to the tamer in less time. So he may get on the forum and demand that sailing be sped up too, without realizing that his demands, who are the voice that he's resonating along with the PvPer, who wants to speed up so that he can go attack him every day, all the time, so he could never grow his crop, so he could never take his carrots over to the tamer because he's going to get wiped off the face of the map because travel time was increased. Yeah. People want the easy road, but they don't think about what the easy road is going to impart on their normal gameplay. They want to be able to get more wood when they hit a tree. But what does getting more wood when you hit a tree entail? Well, it allows the person to build something faster. If they can build something faster, they can, I don't know, make a catapult faster so that they can knock your walls down. They can collect stone faster to put into the catapult to knock your walls down. They can raid you faster. They can wipe you off the face of the map faster. So, oftentimes when we think about things that speed things up or make the game easier, they can have dramatic effects on the balance of the game. Is a good game one where you can make a ship in a day, sail it out, and destroy or be destroyed that day, and then build another ship the next day? Is that a good game? No, because it promotes the attitude that I should build a ship, go out, and try to destroy another ship, because the ship really doesn't matter. Doesn't have value. It only took me a day to build it. What value does it have? It took me 2 weeks to build that damn ship. I'm going to be careful with it. I'm not just going to sail it out and attack the first ship I see, because I put a lot of effort into building that ship. Now that's a different gameplay environment, isn't it? You're going to have a lot less hostile jerks running around trying to kill each other. It's simple things like this that can really change the landscape of an MMORPG, but, for the life of me, I don't think people think about the things they ask for. For the life of me, I don't understand why a good sandbox hasn't been released in the past 12 years. It's unfathomable that we haven't had a good, balanced sandbox for everybody. A game that can foster relations between the PvE crowd, the PvP crowd, the crafters, the online businessmen, the farmers, every different playstyle, because that's what a good MMORPG is. And the sandbox is the home, in my opinion, it's the best home for the MMORPG because it gives the best tools, most creativity to shape a world however the players want it to be shaped. Because there's no quests telling you what to do. There's no lore being shoved down your throat. The lore is what you make of it. Boundless, that's the slide I'm looking at right now, is an example of a good sandbox. Sadly, it's a niche universe, right? It's voxel, it's Minecraft-like, but man, that is a good MMORPG right there because it gives you all the tools to shape the land the way you want. It has a community that has far more focus on creating than destroying. It has an economy that's really out of this world. One of the best online business economies that you could play is in Boundless. I can't say enough good things about Boundless. I haven't played it for a while. It's been quite a while since I played Boundless, but Boundless is a good example of a good sandbox. One that you can play right now. The problem is, it's voxel based, right? It's not it's not really AAA, though it is high quality. It is a really good game. Don't get me wrong, and there is something to be said about the simplicity of voxel-based games, Minecraft-like games, but there's also something to be said about high-quality graphics, and you know, yep, I've rambled quite a bit on this topic. I think it's time to end this rambling and leave some final thoughts that I'm hopeful that the day of the Sandbox MMORPG will rise again. I'm sick of the World of Warcraft clones. I think most of the MMORPG genre is sick of the World of Warcraft clones. Even those that prefer theme parks, I think, are kind of tired of playing the same game with a different name over and over again. And I think developers are starting to catch on to their mistakes, and they're starting to look at trying to do things differently. And we're at this cycle of things changing again, that developers are trying to look outside the box. And maybe this video will be seen by some developer with cash or know-how or the ability to put together a real good sandbox MMORPG. The type that people like me have been waiting for years. There is this huge, maybe I'm overestimating, but I believe there is a huge percentage of the MMORPG community that enjoys the sandbox style MMORPG akin to Star Wars Galaxies, akin to Ultima Online, akin to Worm Online, are a couple of examples. And that if somebody with money were able to come out and give us an online sandbox with some visual appeal, newish graphics, big sandbox, lots of things to do, hunting, fishing, taming, farming, sky's the limit. I think that game would do amazing in the current environment because we're so desperate for it. We've been so desperate for it for so long, but yet we keep getting more theme parks, more quest filled, kill 15 slimes and come back to me and talk to me and be awarded the iron short sword for your efforts, and oh, thank you for killing those slimes, and throw stupid lore down our throat. And there are people that like that type of game. I, for one, I'm not if it was a single player game, maybe I might play a game like that if it had a good single player story. But in a multiplayer online universe, it's not for me. There's a lot of us that, well, we want something more. I know I said I was going to try to end this episode, but I'm thinking about something else right now. I'm thinking of Daggerfall, and I'm thinking of the Elder Scrolls franchise. And I think this is apt to the conversation we're having. So, Skyrim is a pretty incredible game. Morrowind and Oblivion, pretty incredible games. Battlespire is meh. What was that awful thing that Todd Howard did that shouldn't have even been talked about? Redguard? Yeah, that's what it was called, Redguard. Oh, that was a flop. Just terrible. I'd rather play Battlespire, but I digress. No, Daggerfall. Daggerfall really was the pinnacle of the Elder Scrolls. But Daggerfall it suffers from antiquated graphics. Its age shows at this point in time. I love the fact that there is a group that's trying to basically create Daggerfall in a new engine with new graphics. I think that's awesome. But Bethesda is a perfect example of the problem with the game industry. You have game developers like Todd Howard that actually think simpler is better, less is more. They try to convince you of this stupidity. Daggerfall is the best Elder Scrolls game there's ever been. And it's the most sandbox Elder Scrolls game there's ever been. After Daggerfall, each subsequent game turns into more of a theme park. It keeps getting smaller, more dumbed down, more refined, more systems taken away, more things axed. Simpler and simpler, better graphics, simpler, better graphics. That is the trend of the gaming universe, is dazzle the player with fancy things to look at the screen, and they'll totally miss the fact that the game is shallow and not as fun as its predecessor that didn't have as pretty graphics. Skyrim is a theme park. Oblivion is a hybrid theme park. Morrowind, a hybrid theme park. Daggerfall is a sandbox. Perfect example of what has happened to the game industry. It's just to look at the Elder Scrolls franchise. Most gamers are starting to come to the realization that Bethesda is screwing the goat. They're destroying the Elder Scrolls franchise. But it's taken a while for gamers to finally wise up to that fact. Some of us have wised up to that fact a long time ago. Some of us have said consistently that Oblivion's worse than Morrowind and Skyrim's worse than Oblivion. I've said that since the first times those games released. Doesn't mean I don't like those games. I quite love to play Skyrim. In fact, I think Skyrim's an amazingly fun game to play. But it's not as good as its predecessor. If Daggerfall even had half of the graphics that Skyrim has, if Daggerfall even had half the money thrown into it that Skyrim had, I mean, could you imagine the game that could have been if Daggerfall continued to be Daggerfall and didn't somehow morph into a linear theme park environment? I mean, putting things on rails is all good and great. It's easy for the developer to try to give you a narrative and a story, but screw narrative and story. Give us stuff to fill our imagination. Give us the ability to create the narrative and story. People like Todd Howard don't understand what a good game is. And yeah, I thought that was an apt thing to the way the Elder Scrolls have gone. I thought it correlated to the problems that we have in the MMORPG industry. We really do have an abundance of theme park, and it's really time that we get more sandbox. Give us the players the ability to invent our own fun, give us a world where there are game systems galore, and we can choose to hunt or fish or craft or whatever we want to do on whatever given day. Because a proper sandbox exists for us to play. It doesn't right now. We don't have a proper sandbox to play. But it would really be wonderful if we did. Though I am very hopeful that Chronicles of Illyria will fill the void that I long for. But I am doubtful because I've put so much stock in so many games before it that the realist in me says it's probably not going to. So if you're a developer out there and you stumble across this video by this small unknown YouTuber with very few subscribers, but there's something about my message that makes sense to you, for the love of God, please make a good Sandbox MMORPG before I die. I would really like to enjoy a game like Ultima Online again before I end up getting put in the dirt. Anyway, I'm James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade. This is my content. Hopefully you appreciate it. If so, leave a like and subscribe. And until the next time, all, peace.